everybody. This is John from the Geeks From The Multiverse podcast. Today is episode 3. And again, with me is Matt.
What's up?
Awesome. So, thank you all for listening and following, as well as sharing this podcast out. We cannot do this without your guys' support. So, Matt, what is today's episode?
So today actually is part 2 of last week's episode. If you listened to last week's episode, it was video game adaptations to movies. And we talked specifically about those movies that were failures. And I do want to preface this, John, a little bit for our listeners, because of the list of movies, there really isn't one that we feel is 100% successful, right?
Absolutely.
And this week's episode is really focusing on the movies that we feel are successful in their mission to adapt a video game to a movie, and not necessarily, I think, how successful it did in the box office or how well it did in sales. Because those statistics aren't necessarily a measurement stick of how well it did telling the story of the actual video game.
Right.
Right? So, without too much talking, let's get this thing started. So let's get geeky.
All right, Matt. So, I have a very interesting article that I know you and I talked about a little bit, but we're gonna dive right into it. So, what it is it's about Hogwarts Legacy, okay, and how people are behind the idea to boycott the game since it is based on the writings of J.K. Rowling and her past comments on the LGBTQIA plus community. Okay, so when this was actually going on, I had no idea previously when it came to, let's say, the comments that J.K. Rowling has done in the past, right? But again, I don't condone any behavior. I'm just kind of a neutral party in this, okay? Just like I would assume you would be.
Right.
So,
yep.
I played the game, okay? I don't mind it at all. I think it's a great game for what it is. If it's just introducing the world and, you can create a character and kind of go into, play as different houses, whether you're Gryffindor, Slytherin, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, or whatever, right? So, does that make me dislike the game? No. I never, when it comes to this article, I never said that, oh, I'm going to not like this game because of what's going on. It's just, again, I played the game, had no idea this was going on at the time. But what I do find interesting is that this game, which I know a lot of games, depending on, if you're a full-time gamer or part-time gamer or whatever, right? They don't usually introduce a lot of trans, gender people into a game.
Right.
And so I thought it was interesting when they did that, and I thought it was a really unique, I guess, concept, and I was, kind of curious myself when it came to if they had more games like this. But to kind of dive right in, Matt, so what are your thoughts on this? Like, is this, a game where it's, I guess, basically really hard to, get behind? Or is this a game that, when it comes down to how they're doing it, if they're, say, boycotting the game, is this something that is, I'm not saying justified, but like, is what they're doing, I guess, right? I guess if you want to say.
Society being what its current state is today, this topic is very sensitive. So, we obviously, John and I want to keep things very neutral, not siding with one side or the other. And I think if people are going to boycott the game, it's their own choice, right? Like,
absolutely,
if they're going to boycott the game, there's 7 billion people on the planet. Boycotting one game probably isn't going to make or break the game. But I will say that this particular group, like the LGBTQ community, isn't the only community to boycott, Harry Potter or J.K. Rowling in general. People of faith, Christian faith or Catholic faith, and have boycotted Harry Potter for years based on, witchcraft and sorcery.
Right. No, I could agree with that statement.
So it's not the first time this type of thing has happened with a different type of community. More of a controversy style for this boycott. But what I would say for anybody who's really looking to boycott this game is do your research. Don't take somebody else's word. Don't look at a news story and make that snap judgment call. Do your own research, look up the information for yourself, and make your best judgment. Because that's going to tell you if you're offended by it, don't play the game. I mean, I think it's as simple as that. If there's a game that comes out that I don't agree with, I'm simply not going to play it.
Right. And I agree that when you're looking at a game and you're trying to make that judgment call, right? So you're right. Doing the research, understanding what is being said, and actually whether or not you do play a game or not, I mean, really, it's your own choice. It's your own interpretation, your perception. I just think that when people look at this, it is a difficult topic as itself, but I think that when it comes down to the statements and how people are viewing this, I mean, I think you have to realize too that, like Matt was saying, like that she wasn't particularly in this game, like meaning she was helping writing the story, helping the development of
right. She had no
the whole
part
thing.
in the creation. She had no part in the development, no part in the characters, no part in the plot or the script, anything. The only thing that this game has in connection with her is that it's in the wizarding world of Harry Potter. That's the only part that it has in connection.
Right, and I think that if you do look at this game for what it is, I mean, I can tell you visually speaking, it's phenomenal. Like there are definitely some bugs and different things because it's still brand new, but it's still a game that I think can do really well when it comes down to like I think they were talking about trying to do like a DLC, but unfortunately they're probably not going to do it for like Quidditch. Quidditch was a big thing that people were like, "Oh man, I really want to play it," and then you get to fly around on a broom and you fly different mythical monsters that you find throughout the game. But it's in my opinion, if you're just playing it for the first time, you've never seen Harry Potter, you haven't done all that. Honestly, it looks amazing. It plays amazing. It's definitely a game that I could see a lot of people getting really sucked into the game and actually just the world itself. But I know, like I've shown Matt the game, but I know he hasn't played it. But it's definitely one that I could see why maybe some people might not agree with it, depending on your standpoints and your beliefs and how you may view the wizarding world as itself. But if you're just kind of going in neutral, again, like Matt was saying, do the research, figure it out if that's something you want to do, and if you don't want to play it, then just simply don't play it. There's no reason to
Right.
to do that, right? But yeah, no, I think
So to touch on one of your last points, I did do a little bit of research into some games that may have had other transgender characters or featured transgender characters.
okay, and I'm actually quite curious to hear this.
And not surprising, there's not a lot of them.
Right,
I think
figured
in the
probably
future
wouldn't be.
there will be,
Yeah.
but historically there's not a whole lot.
Okay.
So the very first one, and two of these I haven't played, one of these I haven't played in years. But the first one, Cyberpunk.
Okay, I played a little bit of it. Yep.
Supposedly there's a character named V. And in character creation, or character creator rather, there's an option that allows you to pick transgender or non-binary.
Okay, which is a unique feature. Most games don't do that most of the
Right.
time.
And in The Last of Us 2, there's a character who, her name is Lev, or his name is Lev, who is transgender in the game.
Okay, and I mean, I remember playing Last of Us, Part 2, but I kind of wish I would have replayed it before, this episode. But it would have been interesting to kind of see how they did it in the game, and how they portrayed the character, right? Because,
Yeah.
like you said, there's not too many, and it'd be interesting to, kind of see how they, you know, transpired the story around even this character and character progression and whatnot. But
The last one is surprising because I actually don't know who this character is, to be honest with you. But it comes from Super Mario Brothers 2.
see, and just because the sole fact that this game came out, it was like in the late '80s.
It was a long time ago.
Yeah, it was. It was quite a bit. Yes.
So the character's name is Birdo.
Okay.
Okay. And the character was a male who wanted to be a female in the game.
Okay.
And in later versions, it was omitted.
Ah.
So
Okay.
in the earlier versions, when it first came out, that's what the character was in the game, and that's what it was. Later versions, that part of the story was omitted, so Birdo might be in the game, but that part of the story was changed.
So what I find interesting is that they haven't brought up this character even in like future, games that have come out. So like even the Super Mario Brothers 3 or even like Super Mario Party or the, racing,
Right.
games that they have and all that. But I'm surprised that they haven't brought forward this character, especially from, like we said, like late '80s really, or I would assume, I can't remember exactly when, but to bring in that character now, I think it would be interesting to kind of bring it into like the Super Mario Party, the racing, and all that other, fun jazz that they do. But you're right. I feel, with games and developers that they should look at kind of doing some unique taste on that, and I think, he would probably be a good example of one that should be brought back, if anything. But
Yeah, I've never heard of him before, actually looking into it. And I find it interesting, Super Mario Brothers 2 would feature, a transgender character, being the year that it came out. Not that it's surprising that it would feature one,
right.
but the year that it came out.
Right, because I mean, and especially during like the late '80s and everything else, like they don't do those kinds of things normally. That was never really unheard of. Or sorry, it was unheard of to really bring in a character like that. But nowadays it's seeming like it's more streamlined, and I think they're trying to do that, be more diverse and
Yeah.
bring with the
It's more
culture.
in mainstream society than it was in the late 80s.
Right. So, Matt, when it comes to today's topic, right? So I know we're talking about the successful video game adaptations, right? So I know that you and I have some very different choices, right? And I know that with how we view certain things, right? We've already established that I'm younger than Matt, he's older than me, so on and so forth. So our perception is going to be different, right? So
Yeah.
I'm curious, Matt. What is your number one? Like, what is your number one?
Well, I think before we get there, though, I think, like we said, kind of in the start of the show, there's not a lot of successful adaptations, and in the last episode, we kind of do go into explaining why we think that is, and it's really, I think, the lack of studios that really connect with the source material from the games.
Yeah.
But I think you look at some of the very early on adaptations, even some of the newer ones.
Right.
They're only looking really at adding elements from the game and not so much of the story elements, because they're looking at creating a new story if they had to add new characters or if they change the characters in some sort of way. And that's what they're kind of looking at. You look at a movie like Doom, which had Dwayne Johnson.
Okay, yeah, very successful actor.
The most redeeming part of that movie was the maybe 10, 12 minutes it went to first person.
Which I know in the game itself, especially back in the '90s, like it was based on a first person, view. And then when you're, like you were just saying, man, like having a, being only for like 10 minutes, like, hey, here's a first person view, and then all of a sudden it just switches back to what, like, third person, basically looking at the whole, picture. You're not getting the real sense of the real source material of the game, and it's not really genuine, right?
Yeah.
I think that's really what
And
we're going at.
that movie was more about adding in elements from the game than it was telling the story of the game. And that's why a movie like that and many, many others that are on that list are not really good adaptations, because they're only really focused on those elements, other than telling a really solid story like the video game already does.
Right. But
So, my very first one, and really the census of my first pick, is that this, as far as movies go, I'm not touching TV shows until we get to episode 4.
right.
As far as movies go, the census so far is that this one is the best of
Okay.
the movies
So
that have come out thus far.
so in your opinion, they're the best.
Not
so
just
far.
in my opinion. This is just like movie reviews from not movie critics, but just people in general.
Okay, so the general public. So that's good because, when you look at like Rotten Tomatoes, like, how it goes from like 0 to 100, right?
Right.
Where was it at on the scale? Do you remember?
I didn't look at Rotten Tomatoes.
Okay. I was just curious. I
Yeah.
didn't know if it, if it did well or if it was like, like right in the middle or something.
I actually didn't look at Rotten Tomatoes. I did look at like people reviews.
Okay. Well, no,
Um,
I'd rather
yeah.
hear genuine thoughts on this.
And the census of that, it was one of the best adaptations thus far.
Okay.
And the game isn't like, it's not an older game. It's not, a PlayStation or Xbox game.
So where
It's-
did this game come from originally?
It's a VR
Oh,
game.
Okay.
And it's, if you guys are gamers, you'll know what a Mafia style game is.
Right. I do. But
If
yes.
you don't know what a Mafia style game is, I'll give you an example. A Mafia style game is like Among Us,
Okay. Yep.
where you basically have a group of characters who are trying to figure out who is either the killer or who is, like, in this game in particular, the game is Werewolves Within. So this game is, you play as a group of people in this medieval town, and you sit around this table, and the whole game is about communication. It's the nonverbal communication. Because it's in VR, you can actually see everybody that's seated around the table. This game features a whisper feature, so when you look at the person who's sitting next to you, you can actually lean over and use your controller and whisper directly to them because you're talking through a headset. So you basically, like Among Us, like, you have to kind of fight for yourself and be like, I'm not the werewolf because I'm doing this, and I'm fighting for this, and you have to fight for the character that you're playing. And that's the whole premise of the game. You're basically just sitting around this table. You're not doing anything else, but it's kind of like town hall, kind of forum type of game.
So with the game, right? So kind of like Among Us, right? So you're with a group of people. You're trying to, figure out who is basically killing all the other characters without revealing who the killer is.
Right. Somebody in this town is a werewolf.
Okay.
And everybody that's sitting around this table is part of the town. So the whole part of the game is you're trying to narrow down who is this werewolf.
Okay. So what about the movie with the video game? Like, how does it actually give good source, material when it comes to like the adaptation of the movie?
So that's where this movie is very interesting, because the game doesn't really have a whole lot of backstory other than the fact that, yes, it is a medieval town. And all the characters are interesting enough. When you watch like certain YouTube videos of people playing, characters are very distinct looking. In the movie, every single character is very, very unique.
Okay. So,
So,
like, what would be the unique features out of curiosity?
like one's a mailman. One of the main characters is like a forest ranger.
Hmm.
Um, you have a oil drilling tycoon. Um, the kind of outback, rugged, animal skin wearing hunter. So every character kind of has like their little niche. Like you have the really annoying neighbors with the little yapping dog.
So,
Like every character has like their little funny niche. And of course, this movie's a horror comedy, so it's not horror and it's not comedy. It's like both.
hmm.
So they're all funny and quirky, and so you can kind of connect with every single personality. Like you can kind of understand like each personality. Oh, this guy's this guy's that, this guy's this.
So it's kind of random, but it also kind of reminds me of like if you like the board game Clue. Like
It's very
it's
similar to that.
like a very
Yes,
serious tone, but like if you played Among Us, it's kind of like that comedy relief in some ways where you're trying to
it's more humorous. Yeah,
you're trying
yeah.
to figure out who it is, and you're not really like saying, "Oh, it was me." No, I'm just kidding. I'm actually helping out this other guy, but really you were stabbing your partner. So I feel like that's where I kind of see where this movie's going, um, but yeah, go ahead.
So
I'm curious.
in particular, there is a set of scenes where they are actually sitting at a table
Yeah.
and they are actually accusing each other of being the killer.
Hmm.
Which is actually pretty funny when you think of this being a video game adaptation. There's a set of scenes where they're doing this, so you're like, wow, this is kind of cool. Like they're actually doing it in this movie. The acting is really good, and for what it's worth, like this movie is actually pretty good.
I mean, personally, I know you and we kind of talked about the movie a little bit, but I'm actually curious to watch it now because just hearing about it, like if it really did that well from other people, I would be really intrigued to see how well it did, and actually you know probably even play the game with you one of these days and just see how match up it does. But yeah, I'm gonna talk about my first one. So the first one I did, I know Matt probably may disagree with me on this, but so a newer movie, right? So PlayStation recently has been doing like, of course, TV shows like The Last of Us and stuff like that, and they've also been doing certain movies. So one game that came out a long time ago, well, I would say in the last 15 years or so, was Uncharted. Okay, so in PlayStation, I would say it's considered one of the top 10, and just from my personal opinion. I'm not saying for everybody, but this is just me. So Uncharted, the game itself is you're a guy named Nathan Drake. Okay, he's a treasure hunter, and your partners with Sully, who's this older gentleman, but he meets him as a kid. But basically, the premise of the game is you're going through trying to figure out where these important treasures in history are. So the first one, if I'm not mistaken, was based on his like lost or his like great uncle. You know, um, I'm trying to remember the exact name of the character, but that's not important. But the point and the premise is that he's basically a treasure hunter. You do puzzles. There's like little different mini games with inside of it. A lot of action, a lot of different sequences in the game. They came out with 4 Uncharted's. There was one spinoff that they did, but they made the movie. I think 2022 is what I remember, and so they used Mark Wahlberg as Sully, and they used. I'm drawing a blank here. Help me, Matt.
Tom Holland.
Tom Holland. My God, I
Yep.
don't know why I just had a brain fart. Sorry. So you had Tom Holland as Nathan Drake, and you had Mark Wahlberg as Sully, and you bring in this other character, Chloe. I honestly can't remember the actress's name off the top of my head, but basically they use a lot of I would say probably the first game, and then they would use the fourth game that came out and so they're definitely tying in a lot of the video game references, and actually the voice actor that played Nathan Drake in the original series in the video game actually shows up as like a little cameo, real quick, which I thought was really interesting to kind of do that, because normally a lot of those games and like movies wise, they don't normally have like the actual video game like actor to come in. But it was a movie, in my opinion, it definitely had a lot of good references, but there was definitely some, changes to the story. There was some things that, it made it unique as in its own right. But I think overall, I think it did a really great job with, how they could tie in the game and how they can tie in the characters, because they didn't really change much of the story. They actually tried to use from the fourth game, the how Nathan Drake became who he was, and how Sully met with him when he was a young kid, and then I think it was like in the second game where he meets Chloe. But it was like they tied in a lot of different games into this one movie, and I'm hoping that they'll maybe kind of stick to one video game itself, like in that series. But knowing them, they're probably not going to. They're going to kind of jump all over the place. So it's going to make the story a little confusing. So if you do happen to ever play the games, right, it's definitely one that I would say is a great series. It's one of the ones that if you like the, treasure hunt, like kind of puzzle games, has a little bit of like, shooting and different like action sequences. It kind of also reminds me of like Last of Us, where it has like the little like movie scenes like in between. So overall, I think it did an amazing job. But go ahead, Matt, because I know you've been looking at me this entire time.
This one misses the mark for me, and it's because the story does skip around. Like, one, I don't know why you would choose Tom Holland, to be honest. I think that was probably a wrong casting choice. Mark Wahlberg, wrong casting choice all day.
Okay.
But I don't understand like why you can't just do a video game adaptation with Uncharted and just stick to one video game story. Like, why you have to pull different parts of the different games into one story, because now you're making sequels or potential sequels that much more confusing, where now you're going to have to make stuff up.
Well, it's not really making the story up. It's more, yes, the problem with how they did it is that, if they were just basing it off, like, let's say the last game that they just, came out with, then you'd also have to bring in, everybody, from that game itself, and then like tell the story from that perspective, which in the games, yes, it doesn't really go in sequential order, because technically in the beginning of the fourth game, when you're meeting, you're basically seeing who Nathan Drake was and his brother, kind of, tying in the story. Like, unfortunately, you couldn't have done that in the first game, which I don't know why. I don't know why they did it like that, but they decided to do it at the very end, or or very beginning of the first, the last game that came out. But I can agree that, maybe the acting, or like the actors in particular, like the choices, the casting, ideally, it's hard. Like, it's hard to get somewhere right in between, right? Because you could try to find somebody that was, let's say 20, 25-ish in that realm, like in the beginning of like the movie. But realistically, and you know why? I mean, Tom Holland, Mark Wahlberg, they're famous.
Oh,
actors.
I know why. You need to sell movies,
right? And so you need to find these actors who are going to do that. And so, of course, they're going to choose people like that, because they're unfortunately they're not going to go off the street and be like, "Hey, come here, you look like him. Let me put you in this movie." But it's, like I said, overall, I think they did a good job. But yes, it can get confusing if you don't know the story. That's the only problem.
Yeah, it misses the mark for me, and it's for me, Uncharted is in that same category of Resident Evil. It's gonna fall in that same category, because Resident Evil did the same thing, where you start Resident Evil with the first game, and then all of a sudden by the end of the game, you've already hit parts of the story that are from Resident Evil 2, and then Resident Evil 4. And so now when you do another Resident Evil movie, you have to continue the story with other Resident Evil games. And by the time you come up with Resident Evil 3, 4, 5, you're out of source material because you've already skipped over so much plot from the first game, the second game, the third game that you can't go back to those because now you're telling a whole new story. You know what I mean?
Right.
So with Uncharted, when you skip over those story parts, and I understand where you're going from, like the games may not have said like the whole story from when you play the first game to the fourth game, where the fourth game might tell a story from the first game. But when you're telling that story from Uncharted, and you're taking this part from 1, and you're taking this part from 4, and you're taking this part from the third game, it doesn't like you do a sequel. Now, you try to pull something from the first game, it almost has to be a flashback or it has to be something that's extra. And it's much harder to do that unless you're creating a newer story that doesn't already exist, or you're creating a new character, or you're creating something that's not in the games.
I mean, if you take, let's say, like I said, the first game, and you take some parts of the fourth game, right? If you're not, taking the whole story from both, right? There's still things you can add, into the game and or to the movie itself, like sequels and things like that. But I can agree that, it is going to be harder, doing flashbacks, doing introducing different characters because it can get confusing, right? So
Yeah.
I'm going to use a bad example here, but like X-Men, right? It is one of the most confusing timeline stories you can ever watch, and I trust me, if you know Marvel, great. Guess what? If you don't know it, I would not recommend watching it because it goes way back and forth all the time. But hopefully, it doesn't get to that point, right? Where you're telling so many different stories, and then you're trying to combine them, and then it just becomes a jumbled mess, and you have to reboot and you have to do all this, which I'm praying that they're not going to do that. But I get what you're saying. Like it can definitely get that confusing. So, yeah.
So the next couple we've actually talked about in the last episode, and I'm re-bringing them up.
Oh, great. Here we go.
Because,
ultimate debate.
Because, one, I still think, and people from my generation, Generation X.
Okay, hold on, just so I'm clear. Your generation.
My
sorry.
generation.
Yeah.
Mortal Kombat from 1995 is still a cult classic. It will always be a cult classic because it was the first live action of Mortal Kombat. And when you see, like I said before, when you see Scorpion and you see Sub-Zero and many others from that game, it was the very first time you get to see them doing what they're doing as real people. So, yes, to me, Mortal Kombat will always be one of the best. Just in that aspect. Is it cheesy? Yeah. But you know what? I'm a geek. I don't care. I like cheesy. So, bring the cheese, bring me Mortal Kombat. I love it. It's still great to me. For me, it's iconic. The Mortal Kombat theme, it's freaking legendary, dude. I don't know. I don't know, man. I love this movie. I could watch it back to back all day long.
So what I'm hearing is you can bring in a huge tub of nacho cheese and just start guggling like it's no tomorrow while watching this movie and be like, this is amazing, man. This as you just said, you like cheese, so I figured I'll do that for you, man.
As cheesy as Goro looks, as 90s acting as this movie is, the fact of the matter is, this was the very first time, and I'm not talking about, Mortal Kombat Annihilation. I'm talking 1995 Mortal Kombat, the very first one. The sequel is what it is, but the very first Mortal Kombat. To me, it's just that iconic Mortal Kombat, and it's it's just a classic. Like I said, like the very first time you see those characters on the live screen, you go to a theater and you're watching them. It's like magic. You know what I mean? Like you're seeing it in a theater and you're like, I just got done playing these characters on my TV, and now I can see them. Like I can see Sub-Zero blasting that guy into an ice cube and then demolishing him.
So, like I said, I can agree that the soundtrack. Okay, it is legendary. It's iconic, and they have used it in so many different adaptations of different things. But I think, like I've said, you know, you can have your opinion, I can have mine. But like you said, you like cheesy, that's fine. I could debate that all day long. But when we were just talking about earlier with the whole perception interpretation of movies, you know, again, different eras, different generations, right? You're gonna have your own opinion on this. So again, I'm gonna stick to mine. You're gonna stick to yours, right?
So let me get to the other one because the other one is also Mortal Kombat. So before we move on,
okay.
the other one is also Mortal Kombat, and it's kind of a close second because it's the newest version, and I think that's why it pushes the bar a little bit further. For me, it pushes that bar a little bit further because the story between Sub-Zero and Scorpion was just a little bit better than that original Mortal Kombat. It told the story better. The movie featured fatalities that you would see in the game.
Yeah.
They didn't call them fatalities in the movie, but when you're watching it, like Sub-Zero freezing Jack's arms and then them breaking apart. Like that's a fatality that's in Mortal Kombat.
Right.
You're watching these and you're like, "Oh my gosh, I did that fatality in Mortal Kombat." Like so that to me like was a really cool aspect. Goro obviously looked better.
So the one thing I was going to ask was, because I know in the newer adaptations of video games, right, or when it comes to like the reboot, right, when it comes to Mortal Kombat 9, 10, and 11, right, so I would say the fatalities in that looked very similar to the newest movie, especially because of because I don't know if they have a disclaimer on those games. But like I know 10 and 11, like if you watch some of the fatalities, like,
they're awful.
They're gory. Like they're bad.
They go right inside the body,
Like,
and you can see every
like,
little bone breaking,
like
and
it gets pretty messed up. But what's funny is when you just mentioned that Mortal Kombat, the newest one, was one of your in the top 4 of our list here. Mine was also that too. So at least we could agree on this because it's a movie that. The one thing I never understood, and I know you and I can agree, is literally they bring in this random character, this main character, that had zero, like I don't even know why they brought him in. Like
they changed the story too, and that's one of the things I don't like about the game is the whole story between Hanzo and Baihan.
Right.
Was, Quan Chi.
Right, Quan Chi. Yep.
Was the one who went after Hanzo's. And I had their name right at the top of my head, and I just lost it. But their clan.
You're talking about
the Saikao Ryu, I believe.
Yes, the Ryu. Yeah, and then you have the
Quan Chi went after their clan, but as Sub-Zero's clan.
Mm-hmm.
The Lin Kuei, I believe, is there.
Yeah, I think it's the Lin Kuei. Yep.
And
or Lin Kuei.
Killed Hanzo. And then whispered, basically that he should get revenge on Baihan and all that. But in the newer movie, they added in Hanzo having not just one kid, but he had 2 kids.
Right.
And his wife hid the other kid in a floorboard, and then so the newer Mortal Kombat had a brand new character who was an ancestor of Hanzo.
Right, which that was the main character.
And that was the main character.
Which I still think that it's kind of weird.
It is weird.
because like if you're because that's the difference in the story, and that's why I get that they're like, oh, we're gonna try to make it cooler or whatever, but like when you add in this random character, it's not really following the real source story behind like the first through however many they of course they've done. I can't remember exactly how many, but looking at the movie though, I mean, visual effects.
The
It
visual
was
effects are good, and this new character kills Goro in like 5 minutes.
right, which normally it would take like a lot longer than 5 minutes, but yeah.
But one thing to be said that Goro did look better in this movie, obviously because of CGI. But he only had a short set of scenes. Like you only saw him in a short set of scenes because he was killed almost right away.
Right. And
so it's really lame when you think about a character like Goro, who's really, yes, he's a villain. Yes, we should hate Goro, but I want to see what Goro can do.
Yeah, I want to see the capabilities this guy can do.
And we never got to see it because Hanzo's ancestor killed him.
Yeah, that quickly. Yeah.
In like 5-10 minutes.
What I thought was interesting too is like the characters that they brought up, like when it comes to like Sonya, Jax, did they mention Johnny Cage? I'm trying to remember if they did or not.
Right at the end, they showed a poster.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
It was like a little like end credit scene. Yeah. Because I'm trying to remember. So you had. I literally just watched Mortal Kombat Legacies last night, so I'm pretty surprised that I can't even remember some of these people's names. I know who they are. Like, okay, Liu Kang, right? And his brother, well,
Kung Lao.
Well, really not his brother,
It was a mentor, yeah.
Yeah. So, like, those characters in the game, I know Kung Lao, like, it shows his actual, his signature hat with the blade and everything, which was nice. Yep. So they had the interesting, character features to every single one of them, and especially, like, Jax, with Sub-Zero getting his arms off, and all of a sudden he's got this, like, bionic, mechanical arms that literally heats up and it, destroys somebody in like 2 seconds.
They added elements from the game, which I mean, don't get me wrong. I love when they do add elements from the game. But what I don't love is them adding elements from a game and not adding story from the game.
No.
And that's what Mortal Kombat did, was they added elements from the game, like the story between Sub-Zero and Scorpion and, their clans, that whole thing. Like, yeah, they added this, child that was extra. But the whole story between, Sonya and Jax and Shang Tsung and, that whole thing that they did there.
Right.
Raiden and all of that. Like, they told a really cohesive Mortal Kombat story, changing very little, but they also added a lot of elements that you really have to, like, almost kind of like rewatch the movie to look for.
Right, and I feel like that's a movie you could rewatch multiple times and see like new distinctive features that both, have shown. And looking at like some of the newer games, if you played them, like seeing those fatalities, seeing the the different moves that they have and so forth, like that to me would be like something I'd look for, especially if I watched it like, let's say 2-3 more times, to be like, oh, okay, I've seen that, like you were just mentioning, like with Sub-Zero and Jax, like, okay, yeah, I could see that because I just did that, in the game. But
so I don't know about you, and you can comment after I make this comment. But
alrighty then.
To me, like, I think if studios out there and directors, if they really want to make a successful adaptation from a video game, I really think like they just need to take the source material for the game itself, what the plot is, who the characters are, really dive into like what makes this game and develop it into the movie. Because like you take a game like Skyrim, right? If I was going to take that and make it into a movie, I'm going to really want to know what's the plot of the game? What's the story? Who are the characters? What makes it important? Studios right now, they'll take elements from the game. They'll take random story elements, but you'll see a Skyrim movie that will just have dragons and random knights in it. And they'll call it Skyrim, and it will have nothing to do with the game.
Well, it's like they made a movie on, what was it, WoW, basically, like
I haven't seen it, but
Yeah,
I've seen the cover.
Yeah, I mean, I know that it was also one of the games on the list too, but it was one of those games that, you know, if you played the game, great. I mean, there's multiple expansions, things like that. But if you're just basing it
Yeah.
off of one movie, like you're gonna need like several movies to explain everything else. Like it's not
Yeah, I
just
mean,
movie
Elder
one.
Scrolls in general,
Yeah.
yeah, you would need several movies, but I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like, if you really want a successful video game adaptation, you really have to like look at the video game and really dissect every piece of it to figure out like what this game is about and develop that, and not try to add new things to it unless it only drives the story of the game, not your movie, the game.
Right.
And the next episode, when we talk about The Last of Us, this is, I think, where things are going to start to change. Because honestly, I think this show changes the game as far as adaptations go.
Which I can definitely agree with that. Absolutely.
When you can play a game, and I've actually just started doing this, when you actually start to play The Last of Us, and then you start watching the show, and as you're playing, you're going, whoa, like, that was just on the episode. Like,
Yeah.
that's the stuff that I, like, when I'm watching a TV show, that's the stuff, like, I was literally just in that moment playing this game.
Right. And not that I don't want to dive into that more, since, we'll be talking about
We
it
will be
later.
talking about it next episode, but when I'm watching a movie based on a video game, and I can't even think of the video game while I'm watching the movie, that's a problem.
No, absolutely. I think, if you can't relate to what the game has done
Yeah.
and the movie, like, you're right, there is a problem, and clearly the marketing and the way you showed the movie is definitely not something that should be done.
So the video game definitely should be the blueprint.
I agree.
Yeah.
Absolutely. My third one, because, we're going to mention this now. I know Matt hasn't played, Pokemon, okay?
Well, here we go.
Yeah, here we go. I know. Generational thing.
Gotta
Sorry.
catch them all.
Gotta catch them all, baby. So this one is Detective Pikachu. Okay. I know if you played the games itself, does it use source material? I would say that, the Pokemon itself, like, they're really interesting. It's really realistic. And it's quite surprising, because when I watch the movie, you see Mr. Mime, you see Charizard, you see, Bulbasaur, Squirtle, Pikachu. I mean, you see all these characters that you've seen in, like, the original series of, like, the TV show, as well as even some of the games. Granted, like, just like, I would say, just like Super Mario Brothers, right? So it's all pixelated, but, like, it was a little pixelated back in the day, but, like, you get to see the characters for what they were, but now on a big screen, which was nice. So I thought visually it was amazing. It was definitely a really great portrayal of these, characters that you've seen. Now, granted, the movie, is based on this kid whose dad is lost, and he's trying to find, his dad throughout the whole story, but he basically finds a talking Pikachu, which I know it's a little weird, because generally speaking, Pokemon do not talk at all. And they usually say, Pikachu's like, Pika, and like, does its little thing, right? So, the movie had some interesting, plot points on, where they were going and how they were trying to, find the missing dad, which ironically was well, actually, I don't want to spoil that for you, but let's just say Pikachu's voice, if you listen to it, is literally the person they're trying to find. That's all I'm going to say. But it definitely, you know, looking at it, yeah, I would say movie wise, like as a story, yeah, it had to recreate certain aspects for sure. But I think it really, like, if you're watching it for like nostalgia, like if you're watching like the characters, like the Pokemon characters itself, like it does an amazing job. And I think it, unfortunately, it if we're not basing it off of sales, then yeah, it definitely didn't do what it should have done. But um, I think the movie itself, of course, has its little quirks, has its little things, but it had some comedic moments and it had some things that were interesting enough to keep you going. But I know, like I said, Matt's probably not going to agree with me on this movie as well because we just like to debate on everything. But again, my opinion, I think it did pretty well. But again, when we're mentioning the fact that a lot of these movies haven't done a whole, or really haven't really like hit the mark, this movie I would say is, if I was rating it, I would say it's probably about like I'd say like 75, 80, because there's definitely some things that need to be, if anything, it could change the story a little bit, is really what I'm trying to get at. But I'm going to go into my last one real quick. So the last one I had, and I know Matt's not going to agree with me at all. So, because I like choosing ones that Matt really doesn't like, so that way we can, generationally speaking, like see how well he reacts to
Okay,
this.
here we go.
So the one that I chose, he's already given me a smirk. I love it. So the one I chose was Sonic the Hedgehog. Okay, so
Oh boy.
I know. So the best part about this is it is extremely hard to take a character who was in a video game, just like Super Mario Brothers, right? That was, you know, pixelated majority of that, and then like or have some newer games that are, more visually um, better than what it was before. But it was interesting because, and I know Matt knows this, but in the first movie when they portrayed Sonic the Hedgehog, so this is one of the favorite things I like to talk about, is he actually did not meet what he should have looked like, right? So he looked really stupid, and so the community was like, "Nah, we're not having this. This is stupid. You need to rethink the character." So the community was an outroar. Like they were just like, "This is stupid." So they came back, I think, a little while later, redesigned the character, and actually made him look like what he was supposed to look like, which I thought was unique because most movies won't do that. But what I find interesting is I'm going to bring up another movie, but so Chip and Dale Rescue Adventures, right? So it was an old school, 90s cartoon, but they made a movie recently. And what I found funny about it, I mean, this movie is it's a Disney movie, but it definitely had some really adult humor. But anyways, they bring in a character called Ugly Sonic. And so, you know, what I found funny about it is that they didn't copyright the character, and they brought him into the movie, and they were making fun of this guy the entire time. And I just thought it was funny how they brought in like a stupid version of Sonic, and they brought it into Disney, and Disney was making fun of the character the entire time, and was like,
Yeah.
hey, this is an ugly Sonic. I don't know what you want from me, but here it is. So, anyways, talking about the movie, or both movies really, I'll try to condense it here. So, Sonic, you know, basically the premise of like the games itself is like you're collecting these chaos gems, right? And so he's on his home planet, and there's this owl who, you know, pushes him into the Earth, like a different universe, but really, into the Earth itself, because they're part of a different like universe as itself. So, but the owl was really his maternal figure, and so, anyways, he's trying to find a way to get back home, and so he meets this guy who's I believe, a sheriff, and they're trying to help him get back home, and they meet Dr. Robotnik, who was Jim Carrey, who I understand is probably not the best choice for for that character. But I think in some ways I think it really the first one and the second one, like the second one kind of bringing in Knuckles and some of the other characters. I thought it was unique how they brought in those characters, so far. I mean, they brought in Tails, they brought in Knuckles, Dr. Robotnik, but, bringing in like two random, characters, like human characters to like bring them into the story. It was a little weird. It was definitely kind of a weird story moment. Like, okay, hey, Sonic's just gonna be chilling out this guy's house basically, and just like lives there the entire time. And basically, this guy's like, "Oh, you're my son. Okay, why don't you hang out up in the attic and pretend like nobody's gonna see that there's a running, like a super fast hedgehog running around, like, and nobody knows what it is." And so I could say that this movie as a whole, I think, again, I'm gonna bring up visuals, but it definitely, I think it has done a lot better, than trying to do like different characters that were in that like same kind of realm where they're pixelated and stuff. It's kind of hard to bring that up on the big screen. So I think they did a really good job with that. But yes, I can agree that I already know Matt's probably going to tell me that the story was kind of like what is going on kind of a deal. But I think they at least did a good job with bringing a character like that that's normally not supposed to be on the like reality kind of a thing, kind of having that CGI effect. But I think they did a good job with that. So, but story, yeah, they could definitely do a lot better. But yeah, I think that's what I have. But unless you have something else to say.
I mean, it's tough when you have a game with a character that just runs. Yeah, is there a story in the game? Yeah, there's a story, but your character doesn't do anything other than speed run.
I mean, okay, well,
you know what I mean? So when you have this movie, yes, they changed the character, and does he look better? Yeah, he looks better, but you have to create a story for the movie. So, and that's where the story, I think, for me, like, it does miss the mark for me because I think the story does fall short. If they made it more, like, futuristic and did something different, I think it would have been a little bit different. But I think it's only because of how they actually told the story, and you don't actually see the way that Dr. Robotnik's technically supposed to look.
Yeah, I mean,
until the second game.
So the one thing about it, though, is, when you're taking the movie, and like you just said, like looking at like Dr. Robotnik, I mean, this dude is like this really tall dude who basically has like really crazy hair, has a weird looking mustache, which in the second movie he does do that. But the problem is he also has a pot belly, which Jim Carrey, unless he's gonna put on a fat suit, like he ain't gonna look like it. But the one thing I wanted to mention real quick was, if you're talking about speed running, right? In some ways, what was Super Mario about? Because that's almost identical in some ways. Because I understand that Sonic was Sega, right, and Nintendo was, of course, Super Mario Brothers, right? But in the same sense, they were doing almost identical. One was going after rings, and then another one was going after.
It was identical, but in Super Mario, you weren't speed running.
But
it was side scrolling, and you definitely could go for speed runs in Super Mario. But as Super Mario progressed, that side scrolling turned into different. When you got to Super Mario Brothers 2, 3, Super Mario Party, like the game morphed into different things.
No, and I agree. I can agree that yes, they transformed the platform and how they portrayed Mario. But with Sonic, yes, you're right. Like all he does is run. Like
unless you go into the newer games where he's driving cars
or playing tennis with with Mario or somebody. Yeah.
But I think you try to tell a cohesive story, and again, there's not a lot of source material, and you try to create a story, and the movie to me falls flat. But what they did with Sonic, I think studios don't do. So most of the time, like if fans didn't like it, most studios would have been like, you know what, tough. This is what Sonic looks like in our movie.
Right. And so the fact that the community was like, hey, no, you're going to rethink this idea, or we're not watching it. They're like, oh crap. Okay, so let's go back to the drawing board and redo this. So I thought that was unique on how they portrayed it, and they actually listened to the community, which I know in like, I'm not going to go further into details, but like certain games, like they're like, oh, this is what we're gonna do, and you're like, no, man, that's you need to rethink this idea. Now, some video game developers do actually listen, but you're right, there are quite a few that don't, and they just say, here you go, here's what it is, and you're like, well, all right, just like we said before, we're not gonna play the game, so have fun with that.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I'm good. I think that's a pretty good list we got there.
All right, so that does conclude our part 2 of the video game adaptation. So if you are listening and you do like this podcast, please consider giving us a like and sharing it out. We would greatly appreciate it. As always, we are always humbled, and this is just an amazing experience, being able to just talk about things that we like and being able to share our conversations and just getting it out there for you guys to listen to. We definitely don't do this for getting as many people to listen, or trying to get internet famous, or making some kind of a income so we can quit our jobs.
I mean,
like, we're doing this for the absolute fun of doing this. You know what I mean?
So I'm gonna say this. I don't know about. I mean, Matt, you could think whatever, but I mean, that's what I originally thought. We were gonna get like internet famous and like quit our jobs and do all this stuff. I mean, granted, I would still do military stuff, but I'm not gonna deny the fact that when it comes to doing this, I agree with Matt. Like we do this out of our, I guess, kindness of our hearts, and kind of share with you guys the different geek culture that we have. And we always love when you guys, I'm hoping at some point will actually reach out to us, because we do want to challenge you, right? We want you to guys to share, like, whatever it may be, but just get the word out there, because in order for us to grow, and in order for us to kind of maybe expand your minds a little bit, just on the different topics that we talk about, I want people to really challenge yourself. Like we want to hear from you. We have our email, we have, again, Facebook, we have Reddit. Hell, you could go into Spotify and even drop like a little comment in there too, which I found out, didn't know. But again, as always, we're excited. We're our main mission is to unite all geeks, right? And so we want to make sure that what we're saying and what we're doing is hopefully stuff that you guys want to listen to. But again, challenge is this: reach out to us, let us know what you guys think, post ideas. We always want to hear them, or at least consider them, right? I mean, we may not do every single one, right? But we might do that in a future episode or something like that. So keep that in mind when you're reaching out to us. But again, we're going to call you guys out, and we're going to make sure that, we're going to be posting every week, right? And we're going to make sure that you guys, again, stay tuned for any episodes coming up. And again, stay geeky.